Your father weeps, imprisoned. She means harm. Nocturne, the raven's sharp cry echoed through the silent mansion, tearing through the morning's tranquility and magnate Arthur's heart. He froze, his coffee untouched, as the image of his father, whom he believed to be under the best care in a distant private ICU, trembled in his mind. The bird, his winged confidant, flapped its wings frantically, pointing to an old portrait of the elder patriarch, and what Arthur discovered next challenged his entire reality, forever changing his family's destiny. Arthur felt a chill run down his spine, a shiver that had nothing to do with the morning's coolness. The coffee, once inviting, now tasted bitter, and the cup weighed in his hand like lead. He looked at the raven, which with an almost human intensity flapped its wings and hopped on its perch, its dark eyes fixed on the portrait of old Arthur Sr. The patriarch's image, with his gentle smile and tired gaze, seemed to plead for something Arthur, in his recent blindness, couldn't decipher. Imprisoned, she means harm. Nocturne's words echoed in the vastness of the room, laden with an anguish Arthur had never imagined in an animal. The magnate's mind, accustomed to dealing with millions and complex decisions, now struggled to process the scene. Lillian, his wife, the woman he loved and trusted blindly, caring for his father with such tenderness, as she herself claimed, the luxurious private ICU, far from everything, was the guarantee that his father received the best possible treatment. But what was Nocturne trying to say? Could it be possible that the bird, with its peculiar intelligence, was truly conveying such a terrible message? The idea seemed absurd, but the desperation in the raven's eyes was undeniable. Arthur slowly approached the raven, his heart beating erratically against his ribs. "Nocturne, what do you mean?" His voice came out hoarser than he expected, a whisper that barely broke the silence. The bird tilted its head, then flew to Arthur's shoulder, gently nipping his ear, as if urging him to pay attention with his whole soul. "Father, weeps, harm," it repeated, the words fragmented, but the intention to Arthur seemed increasingly clear and disturbing. A wave of guilt and fear flooded Arthur, sweeping away any trace of tranquility. He had allowed himself to become so absorbed in business that he had completely delegated his father's care to Lillian. She had always been so convincing, so zealous in her descriptions. The medical reports that arrived, always detailed and optimistic, were a balm to his conscience, allowing him to focus on his empire. But now, Nocturne's shrill voice tore through this illusion of security, exposing a crack in the fortress of his trust. His father's isolation, justified by Lillian as necessary for his recovery and to avoid contamination, suddenly took on a new and sinister meaning. "No one can visit him, darling. The risk is too great," Lillian always said, with a tone of concern that Arthur never questioned, but which now sounded hollow and false. He stepped away from the raven, feeling the overwhelming weight of doubt. His eyes swept the room, searching for a logical explanation, but only found Nocturne's persistent gaze and his father's portrait. The image of old Arthur, which once conveyed peace, now seemed to carry an invisible burden, a silent pain that Arthur, in his naivety, had not perceived. The idea that Lillian, his Lillian, could be harming his father was an unbearable thought, a betrayal that would disintegrate the very fabric of his life and marriage. But what if it were true? What if the raven, in its silent wisdom and unwavering loyalty, was the only one to see the truth behind the facade of affection and care? Arthur felt an icy chill in his stomach, a dark premonition. He needed to know. He needed to investigate. He couldn't simply ignore Nocturne's anguish. The connection with his father, which he thought was secure, now seemed fragile and threatened by a web of lies. His fingers clenched into a fist, a silent, fierce determination growing in his chest. He would not rest until he unraveled the mystery behind the raven's words and ensured his father was truly safe. The first thing to do would be to try to contact the clinic on his own, without Lillian's intermediation. It would be a challenge, as she controlled all communication channels, but Arthur knew he had to start somewhere. His father's well-being was the only thing that mattered now, overriding all other concerns. Arthur, his mind in a whirlwind, felt the urgency of the situation tighten his chest. The promise of uncovering the truth spurred him to act. He picked up the phone, hands trembling, and searched for the name of the clinic Lillian always mentioned, Serene Paradise, a name that now sounded ironic and disturbing. Upon dialing, an answering machine informed him that the clinic had restricted access, operating by appointment and with exclusive communication via a designated family contact. Lillian, of course. The barrier was immediate and impenetrable. Arthur's frustration was palpable. He tried again, searching for any other number or online information to circumvent the system. Nothing. Serene Paradise seemed an impregnable fortress, a shadow Lillian had carefully constructed. Nocturne the raven, observing from its perch, let out a low croak, as if understanding the difficulty. Arthur felt a knot in his throat. With each frustrated attempt, Nocturne's voice, "Father," "weeps," "harm," echoed louder in his mind, transforming doubt into painful certainty. He sank heavily into his leather armchair, his gaze lost. How could he have been so blind? The image of Lillian, with her sweet smile and comforting words, now mingled with the shadow of a possible betrayal, creating a mosaic of pain and distrust. He loved Lillian, or the woman she appeared to be. The idea that she could be manipulating him, using his love and trust to harm his father, was a devastating blow to his heart. He massaged his temples, trying to relieve the pressure of dark thoughts. Nocturne, sensing Arthur's anguish, flew gently to the arm of the armchair. With its beak, it lightly nipped the sleeve of his jacket, then pointed its head towards the window, to the outside world. It was a subtle gesture, but to Arthur it was laden with meaning. The raven seemed to say that the answer was not there inside the mansion, but out there, where the truth lay hidden. Arthur looked at the bird, a spark of hope and determination rekindling in his tired eyes. He couldn't give up. His father, the man who had taught him everything about integrity and resilience, deserved to be found and rescued. He decided to change strategy. If he couldn't contact the clinic, perhaps he could find a former employee. Arthur, with his vast network of contacts and resources, possessed the tools to investigate. He began making discreet calls, using his influence to gather information without raising Lillian's suspicions. Each contact was a web, each question a thread in a tangle of secrets. The process would be slow and meticulous, but Arthur was determined. With each step, he felt he was getting closer to the truth, however painful it might be. The guilt of having drifted so far from his father, of blindly trusting Lillian, weighed like an anchor. He promised that if his father was suffering, he would rescue him and make up for every lost moment. The human connection, the bond of love and respect with old Arthur, was a non-negotiable value. Overcoming this adversity would be for his father and for himself, to redeem his negligence. Nocturne, the guardian, observed Arthur's every move, its intelligent eyes reflecting the seriousness of the mission. The journey to unravel Lillian's labyrinth of lies was just beginning, and Arthur felt ready. Arthur plunged into the investigation with a seriousness that rivaled his biggest business deals. Every call was made with utmost discretion, every question carefully formulated, not to arouse suspicion. He started with the most distant circles, people who might have had some contact with Serene Paradise, before Lillian took full control of communication. Lawyers, financial consultants, even some old medical equipment suppliers he knew to be meticulous in their records. With each, "I don't know," or "I've never heard of it," frustration grew. But Arthur's determination only strengthened, fueled by a growing urgency. The weight of guilt was a constant companion. How could he have been so naive, so blind to the truth? Lillian, with her aura of sweetness and dedication, had built an impenetrable barrier around his father, a web of lies so well crafted that he had never suspected. Memories of the patriarch's forced smile in their rare video calls, always supervised by Lillian, now seemed like a silent scream, a plea for help that Arthur in his blindness had not perceived. He felt his heart clench with every image he relived in his mind. Nocturne, perched on his shoulder, seemed to read his innermost thoughts. The raven nipped his ear from time to time, a gentle but firm reminder that the mission was real and urgent. Father. Weeps. The bird's words whispered in his mind, urging him onward. Days turned into nights, and Arthur barely slept. His mind, accustomed to financial complexities, worked tirelessly, mapping tenuous connections and cross-referencing sparse information. He realized that the clinic was a relatively new project, and Lillian had been instrumental in its creation and management, which explained her absolute control over every detail. This made the task even more difficult, as she had shaped the structure for her own ends with calculating coldness. The idea that Lillian could have planned everything with such foresight and cruelty was an even harder blow than the betrayal itself. It was the destruction of an image, of a love he believed to be true and unshakable. Amidst his exhaustion, a name emerged in one of the most improbable conversations. An old accountant who had worked for a construction company that built Serene Paradise a few years ago. He mentioned, almost by chance, that the clinic had an unusual staff turnover in the first few months. Many left without explanation, sir. Something strange for such a luxurious place with promises of stability, the accountant said, with a hesitant voice and the look of someone guarding secrets. That small clue, a loose thread in the tangle, lit a lamp in the dark tunnel of Arthur's investigation. He knew he needed to find one of these former employees. They would be the key. The witnesses Lillian couldn't control or silence. Hope, once a small glimmer, now burned with greater intensity, warming his chest. Arthur felt a wave of renewed energy course through his tired body, igniting a flame of determination in his heart. The path would be arduous, but the possibility of rescuing his father, bringing justice, and restoring the truth was the driving force that kept him going. Nocturne, as if sensing the change in Arthur's mood, flew gently to the table and nudged a small photo album with its beak. It was Arthur's childhood album, with photos of him and his father, smiling, embracing in moments of pure happiness. Arthur picked up the album, his eyes welling up with emotion and a deep desire for retribution. That man, his father, deserved the peace and respect Lillian had stolen from him. The human connection, the filial love, was the compass guiding him. He promised himself, and the loyal raven watching him with wisdom, that he would not fail. Overcoming this ordeal would not only be for his father, but for Arthur's own soul, which sought redemption for his blindness and negligence. The search for a former employee became the next crucial step, a step closer to unraveling the truth behind the walls of Serene Paradise and Lillian's mask. The search for a former employee became the next crucial step, a step closer to unraveling the truth behind the walls of Serene Paradise and Lillian's mask. Arthur, with the old accountant's contact list in hand, began to weave a web of questions and investigations. He knew he needed to be subtle, as any false move could alert Lillian and put his father at even greater risk. With each call, each email sent to people who might have indirect information, Arthur felt the weight of responsibility and the urgency of his mission. The first few days were disheartening. No one seemed willing to speak openly about Serene Paradise. Some mentioned the clinic's impeccable reputation, others evaded the topic, and some even seemed frightened by the mention of the name. The wall of silence was as dense as the one Lillian had erected around his father. Arthur realized that his wife's influence extended far beyond what he imagined, creating a veil of fear and forced loyalty. He rubbed his face with his hands, feeling his stubble and his eyes heavy from sleepless nights. Nocturne, perched on the back of the chair, watched him with unusual seriousness, as if sharing his frustration. The raven let out a soft croak from time to time, a sound that, for Arthur, was a constant reminder that he was not alone in this fight. Guilt continued to gnaw at Arthur. How could he have allowed Lillian's ambition to blind him to such an extent? The image of his father, a dignified man full of life, now seemed faded and suffering in his mind. He remembered the patriarch's wise advice, the affection in his eyes, the strength of his embrace. And now this man was in captivity, perhaps suffering, while Arthur dedicated himself to his empires. A tear rolled down his face, a mixture of sadness and contained anger. He promised himself that he would do everything to reverse that situation, to bring peace back to his father's eyes. In a stroke of luck, or perhaps divine persistence, Arthur found a small mention in an online forum for former healthcare employees. A nurse named Clara had posted an enigmatic comment about unsustainable working conditions and questionable ethics at a newly opened luxury clinic. The date of the post coincided with the period of high turnover that the accountant had mentioned. Arthur's heart raced. It was a very thin thread, but it was a real thread, a voice that seemed to echo Nocturne's anguish. He got Clara's contact through a mutual friend, a retired private detective Arthur had discreetly consulted. As he dialed the number, Arthur's hand trembled. This was his chance, the first crack in Lillian's wall. He took a deep breath, trying to control his nervousness. The voice that answered was hesitant but gentle. Arthur introduced himself, omitting Lillian's name, and requested an urgent conversation about serene paradise. Clara, after a brief silence, agreed to meet him, but with one condition: in a public, neutral place, and that he come alone. The tone of her voice, laden with veiled fear, confirmed to Arthur that he was on the right track. The truth was near, and hope, once a small glimmer, now burned with overwhelming intensity in his chest. Nocturne, with a silent flight, landed on his shoulder, a faithful ally in his journey of justice and redemption. Arthur arrived at the discreet cafe, chosen by Clara, his heart pounding. The place was simple, with wooden tables and a welcoming atmosphere that contrasted with the storm in his soul. He sat in a corner, watching the door, each person who entered seeming to carry the weight of the truth he so desperately sought. Anxiety was a knot in his stomach, mixed with the guilt that had accompanied him since Nocturne's first croak. He had failed his father, and the possibility that Lillian was behind such cruel suffering was an almost unbearable burden. Minutes later, a woman with graying hair and tired but firm eyes entered. It was Clara. She recognized him immediately, perhaps by the seriousness of his demeanor. She sat opposite him, her hands clutching a cup of tea. "Mr. Arthur, thank you for coming," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "I don't know how much you know, but what happens at Serene Paradise is not what it seems." Arthur leaned in, his full attention on her. "Please, Clara, tell me everything. My father is there." Clara's eyes filled with deep sadness. "When I started, I believed it was a place of healing. But I soon realized that Dr. Lillian, as she presented herself, had absolute control over everything. Elderly patients were kept in isolation under the pretext of special treatments and contamination prevention. But it was more than that. They were excessively medicated, not for their well-being, but to keep them calm, almost sedated. And the reports. Oh, the reports were forged. I saw it with my own eyes." She paused, taking a deep breath. "Your father, Mr. Arthur, was one of those who suffered the most. He tried to speak, asked to see his family, to leave, but Lillian was relentless. She said he was delirious, that it was part of his illness. I heard his moans at night, his muffled crying. It was heartbreaking. I tried to intervene, to question, but I was threatened. They said I would lose my license, that my career would be destroyed. There was no way to fight alone. With each of Clara's words, Arthur's world crumbled. The image of Lillian, the woman he loved, transformed into a cold and calculating figure. The pain in his chest was physical, a mixture of anger, despair, and overwhelming guilt. His father, his dear father, was suffering, and he, Arthur, had delivered him into the hands of his tormentor. Nocturne's words echoed in his mind. Father weeps. Harm. The raven, in its animal wisdom, had seen the truth that his eyes, blinded by love and trust, could not perceive. Why didn't you speak sooner, Clara? Arthur managed to ask, his voice choked. Fear, Mr. Arthur, pure fear. Lillian has powerful connections, but after I left, I couldn't live with the weight on my conscience anymore. I saw your post on the forum, and something told me it was time. I couldn't bear the thought of your father and others being there, living that nightmare. Clara handed Arthur a small envelope. Here are some notes I took. Some names of other employees who left for the same reasons. Perhaps they can confirm what I'm saying. Arthur took the envelope, his hands trembling. Hope, which had been a flickering flame, now became a fire in his chest. He had proof, witnesses. The truth, however painful, was finally revealing itself. The human connection Clara demonstrated, overcoming her own fear to help, rekindled Arthur's faith in the goodness of people. He looked at Clara, his eyes welling up with gratitude. Clara, you have no idea what this means to me, to my father. He knew what he had to do. There was no more time for hesitation. His father needed to be rescued, and Lillian confronted. Justice would be served, not only for old Arthur, but for all who suffered at her cruel hands. Overcoming this ordeal would not be easy, but Arthur was ready for the battle. He stood up, determination etched on every feature of his face. The journey of his father's redemption and the reckoning with Lillian began now. Arthur stood up, determination etched on his face. His father's redemption and the reckoning with Lillian began. He clutched Clara's envelope, a treasure. He thanked the nurse with a firm handshake, his eyes conveying gratitude. Clara, you saved my father, and perhaps me too. She merely nodded, relieved. Back at the mansion, Arthur felt the suffocating atmosphere. Lillian was in the garden, watering orchids, an image of tranquility that now seemed a facade. He avoided contact, going up to his office, where Nocturne awaited him. The raven croaked, a silent reminder. Arthur opened the envelope, analyzing names and dates. There were 3 more nurses and a nursing technician who had left serene paradise under similar circumstances to Clara's. He spent the next hours making new calls with discretion and urgency. With each contact, Clara's story was confirmed with distressing details. One of the nurses, Maria, described how Arthur Sr. was kept in a dark room, windows sealed. Lillian demanded he be sedated whenever anyone tried to approach. He was so confused, Mr. Arthur. He called your name, but Lillian said it was delirium. It was inhumane. Maria confessed, her voice choked. Arthur's heart broke with each revelation. Guilt consumed him, transforming into cold anger. He had been a fool, blinded by a facade of love. The image of his father, a man of principles and strength, wasting away in captivity, was a constant torment. Nocturne, sensing his anguish, flew to Arthur's shoulder and nipped his ear, then pointed its beak towards the door, as if warning him. That same day, during dinner, Lillian was strangely silent. Her eyes, which Arthur once considered kind, now seemed cold and calculating. She watched him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. Arthur tried to remain calm, talking about his business, but the tension at the table was palpable. Suddenly, Lillian put down her fork, making a dry clink on the porcelain. Her smile vanished, replaced by a serious expression. "Arthur, you've been different," she began, her voice soft but with an edge of steel. "Distracted, and I've noticed you've been making a lot of calls lately. To whom, exactly? Is your business going badly, or is there something you're not telling me?" The air in the room thinned. Arthur felt an icy chill in his stomach. Lillian knew, or suspected. Her gaze, a mix of curiosity and threat, was the unexpected turning point. He had underestimated her cunning. Lillian's mask fell, revealing a coldness that shocked him. His father's vulnerability, his wife's cruelty, and the certainty of the investigation merged into despair and determination. Arthur needed to be cautious and swift. The battle was beginning, and he knew Lillian would not be an easy adversary. He took a deep breath, preparing to lie, protecting his father and himself. Arthur took a deep breath, preparing to lie, protecting his father and himself. He forced a smile, trying to appear relaxed, though his heart pounded erratically. "Business, darling. Just business. A complex merger that takes all my time and energy. I didn't want to worry you. You already have so much with my father's care." He gestured vaguely, hoping the mention of his father would divert her attention. Lillian studied him, eyes narrowed, a flicker of suspicion still present. "I understand," she said, her voice cold and calculating. "But you know you can tell me everything. We're partners, Arthur." The word partners sounded empty, ironic. She swirled her wine. "And about your father? He's so well cared for, isn't he? The clinic is the best. You don't need to worry." Lillian's calm was disturbing, a thin veneer over the cruelty Arthur now saw clearly. Arthur nodded, forcing himself to appear relieved. "Yes, of course. I trust you, Lillian. I trust you completely." The lie choked him, but it was vital to buy time. Lillian smiled without reaching her eyes and changed the subject, talking about plans for a trip. Arthur, however, felt the weight of that dinner, like an actor on a dangerous stage. Later, in his office, darkness enveloped his thoughts. Nocturne, on its perch, watched him in silence, a vigilant and attentive shadow. Arthur massaged his temples, the tension of the night still present. Lillian was on alert. He could no longer afford slow investigations. The time to act was now, but how? Entering serene paradise without raising suspicion was impossible, and confronting her directly would put his father at risk. Guilt gnawed at him. He had promised his father justice, and with each passing minute, old Arthur suffered. The image of his father, strong and just, now fragile and defenseless in Lillian's hands, was a constant and unbearable torment. Father weeps. Harm. Nocturne's words resonated, a constant reminder. Arthur picked up the album, flipping through it. A photo of his young father, smiling, holding him, brought a tear to his eye. He needed to be as cunning as Lillian, perhaps much more. The solution, he realized, was not to invade, but to unmask Lillian in a way she couldn't deny or retaliate against his father. He had Clara's notes and the contacts of the other former employees. He needed more than testimonies. He needed irrefutable evidence for the authorities. Arthur thought like a war strategist. If Lillian forged reports and over-medicated, where were the originals and the records of drug purchases? He needed legal and unquestionable access to these documents. He remembered an old contact, a forensic detective specializing in corporate fraud, known for his discretion and effectiveness. It would be risky, but the only way to get the evidence he needed without alerting Lillian. He knew that Lillian, in her arrogance, might have left traces. No one is perfect. Justice, overcoming, and the human connection with his father were the pillars guiding him. He would not fail. The journey to unravel Lillian's labyrinth of lies was about to enter its most dangerous phase, and Arthur felt ready for the challenge. He picked up the phone, his hand firm, and began to dial, his voice low, but charged with a new and cold determination. Nocturne, on his shoulder, let out an almost imperceptible croak, like a silent sign of approval. Arthur dialed Elias Vasconcelos, the forensic detective, with a heavy heart. Elias's professional voice calmed him. Arthur explained the urgency, the need for absolute discretion, without mentioning Lillian. Elias, experienced in complex plots, asked pointed questions, revealing his shrewdness. They scheduled a meeting for the following morning, in a discreet office, away from the mansion's watchful eyes. The night was a torment. The image of his father, strong, seemed faded and suffering, haunted by Clara's and Maria's descriptions. Guilt gnawed at him. Nocturne, on the back of the chair, shared his anguish, croaking softly, a reminder of support. Arthur reviewed every detail: Clara's notes, the nurse's testimonies, the unusual turnover at Serene Paradise. Everything pointed to a cold and calculating conspiracy by Lillian. The woman he had loved, capable of such cruelty, was an abyss of pain and disillusionment. The next day, Elias's office was a refuge of confidentiality. Books and technological equipment inspired seriousness. Elias, with thin glasses and a penetrating gaze, listened to Arthur's complete story with an imperturbable expression. Arthur detailed his suspicions of forged reports, excessive medication, and cruel isolation, handing over Clara's envelope. "I need irrefutable proof, Elias, something the authorities cannot ignore and that Lillian cannot refute. Financial records, drug purchase orders, the original medical reports, everything that unmasks the farce of Serene Paradise and proves my father's captivity." Elias nodded, tapping his fingers on the table. "It's a delicate case. Lillian is cunning, forging documents carefully, but there are traces in financial transactions and drug supplies. I'll need access to the clinic's finances and, if possible, Lillian's to cross-reference data." Arthur hesitated. Giving access to his wife's finances was painful, but necessary for justice. "Do whatever it takes, Elias. My father is the priority." The determination in his voice was unshakable, driven by the overcoming of his own blindness. In the following days, Arthur felt like a tightrope walker, balancing life with Lillian and the secret investigation. Lillian, without direct questions, maintained a watchful eye, a shadow of distrust in every gesture. Arthur acted cautiously, keeping up appearances, but the urgency grew. Elias sent preliminary reports, inconsistencies in Serene Paradise drug records, absence of internal audits, small cracks that Arthur knew would widen, revealing the truth. The human connection with his father, the justice he longed for, seemed closer. Nocturne, his faithful confidant, was his anchor, reminding him of truth and redemption. Arthur awaited each report from Elias with dread and hope. The initial inconsistencies quickly became concrete evidence. Elias, with his discreet team, accessed the clinic's supplier records, revealing a discrepancy. The quantity of sedatives and anxiety medication purchased by Serene Paradise was far greater than necessary. Furthermore, the prices paid were inflated, suggesting diversion or overbilling. "Mr. Arthur, your father's reports are false," Elias explained over the phone, his voice grave. "We cross-referenced medication data and symptoms. There is no clinical justification for the dosage administered. He was being kept sedated, not treated. The records of Dr. Lillian's visits are frequent, but without therapeutic interaction, only medication orders." The phone slipped from Arthur's hand, falling onto the carpet. He felt the ground disappear. The confirmation was a stab to his heart. His father, a brilliant and vibrant man, was being drugged, silenced, reduced to a shadow. The pain in his chest was almost unbearable, a heavy burden he carried. The image of Lillian smiling about his father's well-being became demonic. Rage and guilt consumed him. How could he have been so blind? Nocturne, perched on the windowsill, flew to the table and nudged his father's picture frame with its beak. The raven croaked softly, sharing Arthur's anguish, a reminder of the ignored truth. Arthur picked up the photo, his fingers trembling on his father's smiling face. "I'm going to get you out of there, father," he whispered. His voice choked. "I swear." The pressure mounted. Lillian, noticing the change in Arthur's behavior, his quietness and distant eyes, became more assertive. One night, she confronted him in the library. "Arthur, you're hiding something from me. I feel it. It's not just business. You've been evasive, and you don't talk about father anymore. Did something happen at the clinic? Why don't you visit him like before?" Her tone was a mixture of false concern and threat. Arthur felt cold sweat trickle down his back. "No, Lillian, of course not. Father is fine, just overwhelmed. Visits are restricted due to contamination," you explained. He tried to sound convincing, but his gaze shifted. Lillian approached, eyes fixed. "Arthur, don't lie to me. I know when you lie. I take care of your father. I'm the only one with full access. If you distrust me or the clinic, I need to know. It's serious." She extended her hand to touch his arm, but Arthur subtly pulled away. Lillian noticed that almost imperceptible gesture. Fury ignited in her eyes, masked by hurt. "I dedicated my life to your father, Arthur. Is this how you repay me, with distrust?" Arthur felt a knot in his throat. It was a dangerous game. Lillian was raising the stakes. He needed to act fast. Elias's evidence was irrefutable, but rescuing his father was risky. Human connection, justice, overcoming, everything cried out for immediate action. He could no longer wait. The truth was approaching. Arthur needed to be cunning. The truth was approaching. Arthur needed to be cunning. That veiled confrontation with Lillian in the library had set off a red alert in his mind. She was not just ambitious, she was dangerous and intelligent, capable of anticipating his moves. He could no longer hesitate, nor confront her directly, without an infallible strategy that guaranteed his father's safety. He spent the night awake, sleep fleeing before the urgency of his mission. Nocturne, perched on the windowsill, watched the darkness outside, a silent guardian of his thoughts. Arthur knew he needed swift, but also legally irrefutable action. Elias's evidence was strong, but to rescue his father from serene paradise, he needed the support of the authorities, and that required an impeccable presentation. In the morning, even before Lillian awoke, Arthur called Elias. The forensic detective's voice was calm, a balm amidst Arthur's storm. "Elias, we need to act. Lillian is on high alert. I can't wait any longer. My father is in danger every minute he spends in there." Elias agreed, understanding the gravity. "Mr. Arthur, the evidence is ready. We have supplier reports, bank statements with overbilling, and the nurses' testimonies. I've prepared a complete dossier for the authorities. I suggest you contact a public prosecutor specializing in elder rights. They have the power to act quickly with search and rescue warrants." Arthur felt a thread of hope. A public prosecutor, someone with the authority to cut through Lillian's web of lies. He thanked Elias and, with a clearer mind, began to plan the next step. Family, justice, and the human connection with his father were the pillars guiding him. There was no room for failure. He contacted his trusted lawyer, a man of integrity and discretion, and scheduled an urgent meeting. In the lawyer's office, Arthur laid out the entire story, from Nocturne's croaks to the evidence collected by Elias. The lawyer, a serious-faced man, listened attentively, his eyes widening with each new revelation. "Arthur, this is serious. Abuse of a vulnerable person, fraud, unlawful imprisonment. Lillian is in deep trouble." With Elias's dossier in hand, the lawyer acted promptly. Within hours, Arthur was before a public prosecutor, Dr. Helena Mendez, known for her dedication to cases involving vulnerable individuals. She was a middle-aged woman with a penetrating gaze and an aura of firmness. Arthur narrated everything, his voice choked with emotion, but determination shining in his eyes. Dr. Mendez examined the documents, Clara's notes, the testimonies of the other nurses, the bank statements, and the medication records. With each page, her expression grew darker. "Mr. Arthur, the evidence is compelling," she said, closing the dossier with a thud. "It's a cruel and well-orchestrated scheme. We need to act immediately to rescue your father and ensure the safety of all other patients. I will request a search and seizure warrant for Serene Paradise and a rescue order for your father. The action will be today." Arthur's heart leaped. Today. This was the moment he had both hoped for and dreaded. Justice was on its way. But the apprehension of how Lillian would react was a weight in his chest. He felt a mixture of relief and dread. The overcoming of that ordeal was near. Back at the mansion, Arthur tried to remain calm, but the tension was almost unbearable. Lillian, noticing his agitation, watched him with a forced smile, but her eyes did not hide her distrust. "Arthur, you're pale. Any problem with the merger, or perhaps with your father's clinic?" Her voice was a poisonous whisper, and Arthur knew there was no more time for disguises. The final confrontation was imminent. He took a deep breath, preparing for the battle that was about to unfold. Arthur felt the air vibrate with tension. Lillian's gaze, once disguised as concern, now carried an icy vein of defiance. He knew that every word, every movement would be crucial. Forcing a calm he didn't feel, Arthur took a step back, creating a subtle distance between them. "There's no problem with the merger, Lillian. And father, well, you yourself said visits are restricted. I trust you to take care of him." The lie slipped from his lips, bitter but necessary. He saw a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes, mixed with persistent distrust. Lillian smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's good, Arthur. I'm relieved. After all, you've been so distant." She turned, walking towards the library door, but stopped at the threshold, turning back. "I just hope you're not underestimating me, my dear." The door closed with a soft click, but the sound echoed like thunder in Arthur's mind. Nocturne, who had been observing everything from the windowsill, flew to Arthur's shoulder and nipped his ear, then croaked loudly, as if sharing the urgency of the moment. Arthur stroked the raven's dark feathers, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no more time for disguises. He picked up the phone, his hands steady, and dialed Dr. Mendez's number. "Prosecutor, I'm ready. Lillian is on maximum alert. We need to act now." The prosecutor's voice on the other end of the line was resolute. "We're on our way, Mr. Arthur. The rescue team and police are already heading to Serene Paradise. A patrol car will come to the mansion to accompany you." Time stretched into an eternity. Arthur descended the stairs, the mansion seeming like a theater set where the farce was about to crumble. Lillian was in the living room, flipping through a fashion magazine, the image of bourgeois tranquility. When the doorbell rang, a thunderous sound in the tense silence, she looked up, one eyebrow arched. Who could it be at this hour? Arthur didn't answer. He walked to the door, his heart in his throat. As he opened it, he saw a police car parked at the entrance, and beside it, Dr. Mendez and an officer. Lillian's face paled. The magazine slipped from her hands, falling onto the carpet. "Good evening, Mrs. Lillian," Dr. Mendez said, her voice firm and direct. "We are here to execute a search and rescue warrant at Serene Paradise and to investigate serious accusations of abuse and unlawful imprisonment against Mr. Arthur Sr." Lillian's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in fury. She looked at Arthur, an unspeakable betrayal in her gaze. "Arthur, what is this? You betrayed me." Her voice was a hissing whisper, laden with venom. Arthur, though feeling the weight of that moment, kept his gaze fixed. No, Lillian, you betrayed all of us. You betrayed trust, love, family. My father. I merely revealed the truth. Dr. Mendez intervened, extending a document. Mrs. Lillian, we have irrefutable evidence, forged medical records, overbilling, testimonies from former employees. Your scheme of cruelty and ambition has come to an end. Lillian staggered, her face disfigured by rage and despair. Lies, all lies. I took care of your father, Arthur. I loved him. Her words sounded hollow, without conviction. The police officer approached, his presence imposing. Ma'am, we need you to come with us. There are many questions to be answered. Arthur felt a knot in his throat. The scene was painful, but justice was being served. The image of his father, suffering in captivity, gave him strength. He knew the rescue was underway. This was the climax of his journey, the moment when darkness would be dispelled by the light of truth. He looked up at the night sky, where Nocturne, who had flown to the rooftop, seemed to observe the scene, a silent guardian of justice. The human connection, the overcoming of his own blindness, and the love for his father had guided him there. The battle was far from over, but the first and most important victory, the truth, had been won. Lillian, her eyes bloodshot with fury and tears of despair streaming down her face, tried to resist, but the officer's firmness was unshakable. Her body, once so haughty, now seemed to shrink under the weight of disgrace. Arthur watched her being led out of the mansion, her empire of lies crumbling before his eyes. He felt no triumph, only a painful emptiness, and the urgency to reach his father. Dr. Mendez placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture of support. Let's go, Mr. Arthur. Your father needs us. In the police car, the silence was heavy, broken only by the radio communicator. Arthur looked out the window, the night landscape blurred, as his mind raced to serene paradise. With each kilometer, hope and apprehension mingled. How would he find him? Would he be very debilitated? Guilt squeezed him, but the determination to correct his mistake was even greater. Nocturne, who had been carefully placed in a transport cage in the back seat, croaked softly, as if encouraging him. Upon arriving at serene paradise, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Police cars and ambulances already blocked the entrance. Doctors and nurses, some visibly shocked, others with looks of relief, were being questioned. The prosecutor, with the rescue team, entered the building, and Arthur followed, his heart pounding. The luxury Lillian had boasted about now seemed cold and oppressive, a backdrop for cruelty. They were guided down a silent corridor to his father's room. The door opened, revealing a sterile but desolate environment. There he was, old Arthur, in a hospital bed connected to machines, his face pale and emaciated, his eyes closed. A nurse, with a sad expression, stood beside him. "He's sedated, Mr. Arthur, as always." Arthur felt the air leave his lungs. He approached slowly, his knees trembling. The image of his father, once so vibrant, now so fragile, was a blow to his chest. He touched the wrinkled, cold hand. "Father," he whispered, his voice choked. A solitary tear rolled down his face. Suddenly old Arthur's eyes opened slowly, cloudy at first, but then they fixed on his son. A slight tremor ran through his lips. "Arthur, my son," he murmured, his voice almost inaudible but full of deep emotion. Arthur knelt beside the bed, holding his father's hand with both of his. "I'm here, Father. I came to get you out of here. You're safe now." Dr. Mendez and the medical team acted quickly, preparing his father to be transferred to a real hospital, where he would receive proper care and detoxification from the sedatives. Arthur did not let go of him for an instant, the human connection between them restored amidst the pain and relief. Lillian would be held accountable for her actions, facing the consequences of her unrestrained ambition. But at that moment, the most important thing was his father's recovery. Justice finally had prevailed. Arthur knew the healing journey would be long, but he would be by his father's side every step of the way. Nocturne the raven, now free from its cage and perched on Arthur's shoulder, croaked softly, as a reminder that, even in the greatest darknesses, truth and love always find a way. Family, overcoming, and the unbreakable connection between father and son would redefine their future together. The days that followed that rescue were a blur of hope and anxiety for Arthur. In the new hospital, his father underwent a battery of tests and finally began a detoxification plan from the sedatives. Arthur did not leave his side, observing every small movement, every blink of his eyes, as if fearing that by stepping away, the darkness would swallow him again. Dr. Mendes assured him that Lillian would face justice, but at that moment, his father's recovery was the only thing that mattered. Slowly, like the sunrise after a long night, old Arthur began to awaken from his stupor. The doses of medication were gradually reduced, and the fog that clouded his mind began to dissipate. His eyes, once cloudy and distant, began to fix on his son with more clarity, a glimmer of recognition and affection returning. Arthur felt immense relief with each small improvement, but guilt still gnawed at him. He held his father's hand, kissed his wrinkled forehead, and whispered words of love and forgiveness, more to himself than to his sleeping father. Nocturne, the faithful raven, was a constant presence. Arthur had obtained special permission for him to stay in the room, perched on a makeshift perch near the window. The raven observed everything with its intelligent eyes, croaking softly in moments of quiet, as if sharing the healing journey. For Arthur, Nocturne was not just a pet. It was a symbol of his redemption, the messenger of truth that pulled him from blindness. When Arthur's father finally managed to sit up in bed and, with a still, weak voice, recount fragments of his captivity, Arthur's pain deepened. His father's words were few, but laden with suffering and loneliness. "I knew you would come, my son," he said, his voice choked as he squeezed Arthur's hand. "I never lost hope." These words were a balm to Arthur's wounded heart, but also a reminder of lost time. The recovery was a long and delicate process, but Arthur was there every step of the way. He read to his father, told family stories, recalled happy moments. The connection between them, once shaken by distance and lies, blossomed again, stronger and deeper than ever. Arthur learned to truly listen, to value every gesture, every smile, every word from his father. He realized that true wealth was not in his empires, but in the unbreakable bonds of love and family. In time, old Arthur regained some of his vitality. He was no longer the vibrant man he once was, but the light in his eyes had returned, and the peace in his countenance was evident. They moved to a quieter house, where Arthur could care for his father personally. With the help of dedicated and trustworthy nurses, the mansion, once the stage for his blindness and Lillian's cruelty, was sold. Arthur wanted a new beginning, far from the shadows of the past. Lillian was tried and convicted, facing the consequences of her unrestrained actions. Arthur felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only a deep sadness for the woman she had become. He dedicated himself to rebuilding his life and honoring the memory of his mother, who had always taught him about the importance of family and truth. One day, as Arthur and his father watched the sunset from the garden, Nocturne landed on Arthur Sr.'s shoulder, croaking softly. Old Arthur smiled, stroking the raven's dark feathers. "Our little hero," he murmured, looking at Arthur with unconditional love. Arthur felt his heart overflow. He had overcome his own blindness, faced the truth, and rescued his father. Justice had been served, and human connection, family love, had triumphed. The future, though with its scars, was promising, full of healing, redemption, and the certainty that together they could face any challenge. The future, though with its scars was promising, full of healing, redemption, and the certainty that together they could face any challenge. In that new house, more modest but flooded with light and tranquility, Arthur and his father built a new routine, woven with patience and love. The garden now was the stage for their mornings, where the gentle sun caressed the wrinkled and tired, but now serene, faces of old Arthur. He sat on a wooden bench, watching the flowers Arthur had planted, a small smile on his lips. Arthur, in turn, dedicated himself to every minute detail, from preparing breakfast to reading books his father loved so much. His corporate empires, once the center of his existence, were now managed by a trusted team, allowing him to dedicate himself fully to his father's recovery. He had learned that true wealth was not measured in profits, but in precious moments of connection. Nocturne, the loyal raven, was a constant and comforting presence. He flew freely through the garden, occasionally landing on old Arthur's shoulder, who stroked him with affection. The raven, with its soft croaks, seemed to understand the quietness and peace that now reigned, a stark contrast to the days of anguish and secrets. For Arthur, Nocturne was more than a pet. It was the personification of truth that refused to be silenced, a living reminder that vigilance and love can unravel the darkest intentions. His father's recovery was a slow journey, punctuated by small but significant advancements. There were days of clarity, where the memories of captivity seemed distant, and days of melancholy, where fragility was present. Arthur was there for everything. He listened to his father's stories, the memories of a vibrant life before the darkness, and encouraged him to dream again. With each genuine smile from his father, with each word spoken with more strength, Arthur felt his own heart heal. He had forgiven himself for his blindness, understanding that the love and dedication he now offered were the purest form of redemption. Justice for Lillian had been a painful but necessary chapter. Arthur did not dwell on anger or resentment. Instead, he focused on rebuilding. He supported institutions that protected vulnerable elders, using his influence and fortune to ensure that others did not suffer the same fate as his father. It was his way of transforming pain into purpose, of honoring his father's struggle and his mother's memory, who had always preached kindness. One afternoon, as the sun painted the sky in orange hues, Arthur Sr. asked to walk a little more in the garden. With his son's firm support, he took a few steps, feeling the grass beneath his feet. His eyes, once full of pain, shone with new hope. He stopped, looking at Arthur, and a wide, sincere smile spread across his face. "I'm home, my son," he said, his voice still a little weak but laden with deep emotion. "Thanks to you." Arthur felt a warmth flood his chest. He embraced his father tenderly, tears flowing freely. They were not tears of sadness, but of gratitude and relief. Nocturne, perched on a nearby branch, croaked softly, like an amen. In that embrace, Arthur understood that life, with all its trials, always offers the chance to start anew, to love and to reconnect. Family, overcoming, and the unbreakable connection between father and son were not just words, but the essence of a future that, finally, was truly happy and at peace.